MLS Aces Podcast. This is your host, Tom Sweezy. This is episode 281. And joined with me, I have Andy Deossa, formerly of Yahoo Sports, ESPN, Boston Globe. Andy, thank you for joining with me. I know we don't have Jason Vivang on this week, but we're still going to have a great episode talking about everything going on in Major League Soccer. I mean, I'll start things off with you, just kind of high level. What has your attention right now in this MLS offseason? I know we could possibly touch on Inter Miami in this conversation, but just what has your high level, like MLS is really kind of doing the thing this offseason?
Yeah, I mean, it's definitely a I guess interesting time in the offseason. January is always kind of that middle ground where teams start making moves, but other teams, I guess, are quiet per se.
Yeah.
But rosters are still being rounded out. So yeah, you said it. I mean, Inter Miami obviously is going to get most of the attention, but there's been a lot of movement around. Obviously, Colorado has made some moves that grab attention. Not to be LA biased, but I think the Galaxy are having a really good offseason. There's definitely teams around the league that have made significant moves, and then there's teams that you're looking at like, okay, like the start of the season is going to get closer, and there needs to be some movement because what you're going to put on the field is not going to be good enough. So I would say if there's besides Miami, definitely Colorado and the Galaxy has grasped the most attention from me so far this offseason.
No, I mean, look, for sure. I think Colorado has the eyes of a lot of people, and I think the Galaxy. I'm going to say quietly making some solid moves. They still think some work to do, and you mentioned it, LA bias. You're out in Los Angeles. Let's start with the Galaxy because I mean, look, a lot of big name players are gone. Chicharito's gone. Douglas Costa's gone. Lucas Calgari's gone. Tyler Boyd, Raheem Edwards, guys like that, right? But they have made some additions and kind of some MLS depth pieces, I'd say, into John McCarthy, Miguel Berry, John Nelson, also adding Japanese international, the right back, Yamin? Do you know how to pronounce it correctly?
I think it's Yamin. We'll go with that.
Okay, we'll go with Yamin. A lot of reports right now, though, on who they're potentially kind of going after for some DP wingers, potentially DP forwards. What's the state right now for you of kind of LA Galaxy chatter, LA Galaxy talk? I know we're reportedly close to a Gabriel Peck signing right now going on with the Galaxy. What are you hearing around the Galaxy universe?
Yeah, it's a change. It's crazy because every time you talk about the Galaxy, it's the most historic club in MLS, and it's all great to mention the past and everything that they've accomplished in the league. You can't overlook, but you also have to be cognizant of like what they've been in the past, 7 to whatever years, and it's been awful. And since LAFC has come into the league, it's put a lot of pressure on the Galaxy, pressure that they haven't really been able to live up to. Now, you mentioned the big names, Chicharito, Douglas Costa, and obviously in the past, Latan, and that's the Galaxy way. But I think it all started when they got Will Kuntz over to the Galaxy from LAFC. It kind of changes the mentality, changes the approach. I think he's a brilliant mind when it comes to negotiating. We saw that be successful at LAFC, and now the wheels are turning. Like you said, you're getting MLS depth pieces that you need to fill the roster out. They're sitting on the Peck signing, which is going to be, the way that Greg Vanney likes to play. Wingers are very important in his scheme, so that's going to be a big deal for them. And I think for me, they need to basically get that number 9. I think Jovic is good enough to be a starter on that team and able to contribute, but he was a little bit up and down, and they have the open DP spot, so I think that's their area of focus. But otherwise, I think they rounded out nicely. You have a center back pairing that know each other. That's gonna pay dividends. I think one of the best players in the league still, Ricky Puig. There's a lot of talent on that team, and I think that you're finally seeing, okay, the bar was set. It couldn't be any lower than it was last season. Sure. It started with the boycott, and everything was just bad. Yeah. So I think all these steps that they're progressively taking are kind of giving them a fresh slate to work with, and that's a breathing room for Greg Vanney, because sitting in those press conferences and talking to him all season, like, you could tell he was just straight up defeated. And I do believe that he is a very good head coach in MLS, but he kind of was just working with what he had. So I think this is a good new start for them. And I think that I'm not going to say, oh man, they're going to be, a championship caliber team, because defensively they're probably still going to lack a little bit, as they've shown. But I think for what they're coming from to where they are now, I think it's definitely a good look for them.
No, I mean, look, I think the Galaxy, right, like you said, the lows of last season were real. Boycotts, fans clearly not happy, changes in the front office. But I think the changes that have been made in the front office, especially, right, if we're going to start with that level of things, I think are positive in the sense of getting this club back in the direction of historically what they were, and maybe even, getting the reputation around the city of Los Angeles probably back in the Galaxy's favor over LAFC. So, I mean, I have to say, and I agree with you, I like what they're doing. I think defensively, there's still going to probably be some holes. There's a lot of age on that back line mixed with a lot of kind of inexperienced youth, which is both exciting, fun at the same time, as I'm sure frustrating at points during the MLS season for sure. So I think there's a lot of changes that need to come. What do you make of the goalkeeping situation with the Galaxy? Because I know right now, like I said before, John McCarthy's coming in. Jonathan Bond, I know, is a big question mark. Is he going to remain with the team? I know Novak Mikovic is still on the team, and he got some run at the little bit at the end of last season. What's your take of what the Galaxy should do, what you're hearing, anything like that around that?
That one's interesting because I think the McCarthy signing, it's kind of like twofold, because I think the perception of McCarthy is like he's not necessarily a starter in MLS, but when he filled in for Crepo on LAFC, he wasn't terrible while he was starting. And I think that a lot of times with goalkeepers, it's about confidence. And I think obviously that confidence comes with playing more. So listen, I think Bond hasn't been as bad as people may perceive him to be, but when you're playing in front of a defense that just is leaving wide open spaces and is not aligned in the back, it's kind of hard for you to stand out to be a good goalkeeper. Now, sure, if you look at the stats, like shot stopping, things like that, okay, there's definitely an argument to be made, but I know people here in LA love Bond. People in the organization love Bond. I honestly, I don't know what direction they're moving in. To me, it seems like it's just the open, like, hey, we'll see. But once again, I think that if you get into the season and you don't have a defined number one after like a month or so, then it's gonna be not beneficial to any of the keepers, because I think that confidence starts to dwindle. Obviously, the competition is good and they have preseason to kind of iron those things out, but I mean, I don't think I would be shocked to see any of the three like step up and be like, "Hey, we're the number one here." So it's not the worst place to be at. But I think in that position, I'd rather have a definitive like, "Hey, you're my number one," and then these guys are kind of just here to play supporting role.
100%. Look, coming from an NYCFC fan last season, going into the season with a mix of who's going to be your starter, who's not. It's not good for anyone from the club, teammates, confidence, like you said. So I can 100% agree with that point. But look, I think the Galaxy are on the right direction. I think, like you mentioned, I think a DP number 9 that, it's not any Shadi Ovalich. I think that, the Galaxy clearly want to get to different levels and to the top of the league levels. And I think DP9 mixed with, with the PEC probably would be, definitely hitting different high levels for the Galaxy, depth across the board and being able to compete in multiple competitions. I mean, look, I think at the end of the day, they're doing things at this point, this offseason, for 100% better than the other team in LA going on right now. The LAFC, it's odd because we don't really talk about LAFC struggling much when it comes to, I think, roster construction and putting a team on the field or a team on paper, even at this point, So right now, let's start with the positive. I know I saw some comments from you on Twitter about it, but Giorgio Chiellini hired as a player development coach within the last few days or so. That has to be a good thing. A guy, obviously, legend of the game coming in. You get a few good years with him as a player, and now he's coming in and he's going to be an off-the-field leader for you as well. I mean, things have to be at least positive in that sense, that you get to keep Chiellini within the organization.
Absolutely, and talk about a player that people love. I mean, anybody that's spent any amount of time around him has talked to him. I've been lucky enough to talk to him on a few different occasions, and he's just a pleasure, man. He's one of those guys that you could tell. I mean, the respect factor is something that goes a long way, but I think it's a cultural thing, like coming from a different country, kind of coming here and not necessarily being like, hey, I'm a superstar, I'm gonna like outshine everybody. Like, no, he took his time. I remember even in his introductory press conference in 2022, he was very very knowledgeable about the league already, and he talked about that in his press conference. And it was kind of like, this guy from Italy is over here already talking about MLS. He just got to the States. So it's a great move for LAFC in many ways, because obviously his effect on the locker room was probably further than the one that he had on the field. which was pretty damn good itself, even at his age. There's a young Italian player in the ranks at LAFC that he's going to obviously be able to be a mentor for more closely than others. But it's just one of those guys that you knew after soccer, after his playing career, something good was going to be lined up, and for LAFC to be able to take advantage and keep him around is going to be a big deal. And that goes a long way when you talk about recruiting players, when you talk about interest abroad. I mean, all of that stuff plays an effect. So that's a signing that they made in 2022 as a player that is still paying dividends, and it's a good look for LAFC. Now, the other side of it is what you're saying is like, now where's that player movement? Where are these players? What are we bringing in? Because the developmental part is a huge part. And I always think about LAFC and they hit the ground running so quickly that I think the expectations kind of shot through the roof. And you do have to remember that this is a team that's only a few years into existence, and they're still like, I think they're still teetering with like, okay, we have this perception, we have this personality, but we also have to remember that we need to play the right way in developing these players in the academy. And Jordan Harvey, who used to play for them in the early years, is also part of the coaching staff there. So it's making these steps that are going to help them, in the future. But it's LAFC. Everybody wants to see the players, and this team just won the MLS Cup. They just went back to another MLS Cup. Like, they want to see the players. They want to see the signings. They haven't been there yet, but I'm confident that John Thornton is turning some pages and turning the wheels, because that's how they get down in LAFC, man. It's just their business model. It's the way they do it. Then bringing in a keeper of that caliber, of Lloris caliber, is interesting. It's interesting because Max Crepeau was obviously great for them, but it's part of the business and things that happen. But yeah, there's definitely some holes on that roster. There's definitely a lot of questions that need to be answered. Players out of contract. What are they doing with Carlos Vela? Kellen Acosta is another name out there that's been floating around of moving. And then you start seeing the roster kind of taken apart. And one thing for me about LAFC last year compared to their cup winning season is the depth wasn't what people perceived it to be. Like, they had some names on the bench that you say, okay, maybe they're able to come in and affect the game. And it wasn't shown. It wasn't something that was evident as it was the year that they won the cup, that any sub that Cherundolo seemed to make worked to his benefit, and he was able to get the best out of the whole roster. So interesting offseason for LAFC for sure.
I think the interesting thing to me, at least about LAFC right now, and maybe it's a point that we haven't really seen the club at, is focusing on youth in comparison to maybe a big name star, right? Like, I mean, outside of Hugo Lloris coming in, right? That's not a youth play at all. But you have guys last year who they brought in a Bogush and a Krastev, right? Stipe Buke, Christian Oliveira, like even guys that they're developing in house, and an Eric Dueñas or Nathan Ordaz, right? Like they're a very young team currently as we're talking about them. And, like you said, John Thornton's one of the best at what he does in Major League Soccer. And I'm sure players are going to be coming in. I'm sure high caliber players are going to be coming in. It's just kind of eventually it's going to be inevitably like, when do we see these signings? Not really if the signings are coming, in my opinion. But I mean, look, I think this is going to be a little bit of a new look LAFC, or maybe a new mindset LAFC, because like you said, they're still relatively young in their MLS history, and eventually you do have to develop. Eventually you do have to kind of bring in younger names and bring them up to a point where you can move them on. Because if we're seeing it like we saw with the Palacios this offseason, I'm sure that didn't go as swimmingly and as smoothly as they wanted it to go, and they probably would have liked to have captured a little bit of cash for a move like that. So I think that there's a little bit of a change that we're seeing in LAFC, but not in a bad way. I think sometimes growing pains happen, and growing pains are needed for an organization. I don't know if you have anything you want to say back to that, but we can continue on into this great world.
I agree. It's a transformative offseason for them. And eventually, like, we've been kind of sitting on this for the past few years, but like eventually the Carlos Vela conversation was going to come up, and it happened a few years ago, and it was like, okay, we'll give him a few more. But eventually, that was going to run its course, and whether or not it has or it hasn't yet, either way, his role, if he stays, has to be reduced. And if he doesn't stay, then, thanks for everything. As an LAFC fan, people are going to say thanks for everything, and we're on to the next chapter. But that's the part of the business that happens. So it's a transformative offseason for them, because they're going to have to obviously tinker with that. Like you mentioned, Chiqui Palacios, who Cherundolo said many times last year is probably the best defender in the league. I don't know if I agree or not, but a hell of a defender, and had grown a lot, especially under Cherundolo's influence and guidance. So there's just a lot of pieces that need to be solved. And I think that because who it is and how they came into the league, they have these expectations, but maybe they shouldn't rush into like, all right, we need to fill this player with this player. Like maybe they should take their time and say, let's see how what we have here, and then kind of reassess things maybe in the summer and what we need. But once again, it's LA, it's that team. Like their ambition is through the roof. So
For sure.
it's really interesting.
I mean, look, at the end of the day, right, MLS is still Major League Soccer, no matter how much we talk about the Messis and everything like that around it. There are salary cap restrictions. There are roster rules restrictions that all clubs from Miami to LA to Colorado to RSL have to play with, right? So at the end of the day, I think this is where front offices need to get creative, and John Thornton's shown that. And before we move on from LAFC, what's your take on the Dennis Bouanga situation? Is it simply just pay the man, right? Like we just got to give this man his cash because he's the best player in the league at this point, or like what's your take on it?
Yeah, I think after the season he had last year, it's kind of hard to look over that and say, we try to negotiate, like give him the money he deserves, because you have to remember the same thing happened with Chicho Arango when they won MLS Cup, and you let a player like that go, and then you look at LAFC and say, okay, the biggest hole they had was in that position. Right. So Denny Bouanga, I mean, I think since he's gotten to the league, it's been incredible. It's just to watch him, his demeanor as a player, as a person. But my thing is, like, you also have to remember how many games LAFC played last year. They're not going to play as many games this season. So if you're able to capitalize on a player of that caliber in an MLS calendar and Leagues Cup, but you're not focusing on an international tournament, like things like that, there's a lot more focus on the league. And you're talking about a team that just went to MLS Cup after complaining all season about fatigue and this and that. So it's like, if you have a player like that on your hand, unless you're going to get the money you want for him elsewhere, like pay him, let him show out again, and then cross that bridge when you get there in terms of negotiating.
I mean, look, literally his goal contributions in I think 53 games or something like that it was literally globally top of the world. And I mean, my opinion is simply just give the man the money. Obviously you're not going to give him Messi money at this point, but make him number 2 in the league because it's totally fully deserving. But yeah, no, interesting situation. We'll see what happens with LAFC going forward. And, let's take a step outside of the city of Los Angeles. I want to hear your take on kind of the big moves to Liga MX. Cade Cowell, Brandon Vazquez. Tom Bogert's been all over this, reporting the Brandon Vazquez moved to Monterrey for $7.5 million plus add-ons and the sell-on percentage. Cade Cowell to Chivas for $4 million add-on, sell-on percentage, all that stuff. I think smart moves for from the club's perspective for Cincinnati and San Jose. I think very smart moves. But is there a larger impact that you think we're going to potentially see from MLS players getting sold to Liga MX? Because we haven't really seen, I would say, MLS players consistently sold to the top 4, top 5 clubs of Mexico.
This is Don Garber and Mikel Arriola putting their hands together and saying, yes, the plan is working. I absolutely. It's what they want. It's what both leagues want. It's why they have this relationship. It's why they revamp these Leagues Cup and are continuing to be in business together. They want these leagues to work interchangeably. And of course, there's always going to be the Mexico versus United States or whatever. But in terms of the league, you can't compare the leagues because there's just so many differences. But in terms of, like you're saying, the relationship of players and the movement, I think it's going to only keep growing because now you have more exposure because of this Leagues Cup. You have more exposure to players. You have more exposures to front offices. You're going to gain familiarity. And it's not like it was 10 years ago where people weren't watching MLS. Like, people in Mexico are now keeping tabs on what's happening at MLS because now they're direct rivals in a certain sense. Like, let's take Messi out of the equation last year, Leagues Cup. If an MLS team were to win Leagues Cup without Messi, that would have been like, and Mexico received as like, oh no, like this can't happen because Mexican teams do not like to lose to MLS. Even when they had the All-Star game, like even that was a thing of like competitive nature and we need to win this. So you have to remember, like, these players are making strides here in the States when it comes to Brandon Vazquez, when it comes to Cade Cowell. And, I think Cade Cowell is a specific case because I think the potential he has is very high and a lot of people here know it. he just hadn't been able to hit it. So it was like,
Yeah.
where's that move going to be for him to be able to kind of show that? And I think going to Liga MX is probably the best alternative because it's still close enough. And I think people here are still going to be very invested in what he's doing down there, especially on a big team in Mexico where eyes are going to be on him. So if he's able to show out in Mexico, that's a very good look for the league, for a player that we know could blossom into something serious. And he's right here. He's close. And not to forget, like, he's going to be playing against MLS teams in this Leagues Cup. So he's still going to be like, things like that are still going to be a thing, a factor. And when it comes to Brandon Vazquez, like, I think the trajectory of Cincinnati has been very funny because, like, you're talking about a team that went from literally from the bottom to the top. And that was always going to be a move. It was always going to be a move. And I think, once again, if you look at him, where he's at in his career in terms of like where he's going, if he's going to get the amount of playing time and still factoring like the U.S. men's national team is a factor.
Yeah.
You have to think about all these players in terms of like, we need to show our best in the moment to still be, taken into account for the national team pool, especially in a Copa America year where they're going to be hosting a tournament where all these players are going to be here. So I love both of the moves. I think there's still a little bit, like I said, a discourse between the MLS and Liga MX, but it's going to only keep growing because Liga MX has a lot of money to throw around. They're going to be looking at players, and you've seen players go there. Chicho Arango, I'll mention again, went there, didn't have the best run, whether or not it was a problem with the coach, whatever it was. Come back. Raul Ruiz used to play in Mexico, so there is a little bit of that link, but I think it's only going to keep growing. And I know personally from talking to Garber and Areola that this is exactly what they want. So once again, it's the plan working to perfection.
Yeah, it's literally it's funny, right? Because it's like, I think Mexico fans, like Mexican soccer fans and like American soccer fans at the high level, right? If we're generalizing it, probably don't like the interchange. It's still the rivalry. It's still whatever it was 2 years ago. America had the 2 international trophies over Mexico and the CONCACAF Champions League and the All-Star game. We're talking smack. Okay, Mexico's, I think, back on the rise, is getting to a very top point as well, right? So it's this interchange back and forth that I hope never dies, because I think it's such a unique and strong rivalry in all the positive ways that we can talk about it. And look, personally for me, I'd love to see both of these guys go to Europe, not really Mexico, but I can't argue with you in the point that I think Vazquez is going to dominate at Monterrey. I think it's a perfect tactical fit, and I think he's such a strong player for a league like that. Cade Cowell, I like a little bit less. I'm a little bit less, like, excited about that move. I don't know. There's just something, I guess, about it in me that I would have rather seen a different kind of move for him. But look, to your point, if he can go ball out at Guadalajara, then, I mean, the sky's the limit for him and his international future for the U.S. as well. I don't think either of these moves are really going to impact the USMNT future for either of them. I think Vazquez, I said this on Twitter, right? If Vazquez goes to Liga MX and he's, killing it for Monterrey, compared to if he went to, the championship and he was scoring like 8 goals, 10 goals there, I don't think that would change a USMNT call up for him underneath like Berhalter's eyes, right? So I think that it's a smart move for Vazquez. I want to see what Cowell can do. And, it's an exciting time. And like you said, behind the scenes, I think the leagues are loving it, especially at the top, for sure. It's exactly what the leagues want.
And my thing about like the jump to Europe is like, it's always such a glamorous thing, but it doesn't pan out that way all the time.
Yeah.
And you have to, like, there's so many leagues in Europe. There's so much opportunity. Mm-hmm. But take a Christian Ramirez, for example. Like, he goes out there. He wasn't, when he left MLS prior to that move, he wasn't like a top 10 striker in the league at all. He's a great player, but he went out there, he scored a few goals, didn't necessarily get the chances that he wanted to. Came back into the perfect situation, tore it up, wins MLS Cup. Like, I think that and Miles Robinson, who we'll probably talk about, is a perfect example. Like, the move to Europe is always like a great vision, I think, and it does pan out for some people, and it doesn't for a lot. But I think that there is something to be said about like still being close, still being around, still having eyes. I mean, let's be honest. A lot of people are not watching a lot of these European leagues and keeping eyes on that, maybe from the coaching level and the scouting level for sure. But because these players are staying, they're going to be in Liga MX. There's going to be a lot more of attention paid to them, and I think that's beneficial for them. Whether or not it changes anything in the U.S. national team, probably not. But you're gonna, if Brandon Vazquez is ripping it in Monterrey, we're going to be a lot more aware of it than we would be if he was ripping it somewhere in Scotland or wherever, anywhere in Europe. So there's a little bit of trade there, but I think, it's a good move for both of them. And on the other side for both of the teams, like it's necessary business for them to be able to show that they could have these players grow them, develop them or whatever, and kind of make those negotiations.
No, for sure. And look, I'd love to hear your Miles Robinson take. We chatted about it a lot on last week's episode, so I don't want to dive into my personal opinion too much, but I'd love to hear the take. I think it's a smart move for Robinson for sure. It's a smart move for Cincinnati. It probably sucks for Atlanta as much as that's going to suck for them. But, I don't see a negative, for this move at all. And to your point that I just want to say quickly is I think each individual move needs to be looked at in its own like magnifying glass. I don't think you can say, right, like every player should be sold from MLS to like a Belgium or a Scotland or, something like that, because it may not be the right fit. It may not be the right opportunity for that player to get minutes and grow or whatever. A move to Mexico might be the next best fit. A move to another MLS team might be the next best fit, as we've seen with Miles Robinson. So I'd love to hear your take on Robinson.
I think it's all about timing when you talk about Miles Robinson. You have to remember he came off of that injury. He was, I think at his kind of like maybe not there, but reaching that peak before the injury and kind of making those strides as like a defender that's well known, that's getting all these looks. Then he has the injury. Then I didn't. The thing is tricky because Atlanta, like, they just leaked goals last season, and it's like that's not necessarily an indictment on him. It's just the way that they played, which was fascinating to watch every game. None of their games were normal, but I think for him it was smart because I think he even mentioned it in an interview that he did with Fox that it's really just about the moment and what made sense for him. Like that jump, it's not like he's closing a door and saying, "Oh, I can't jump to Europe in that moment," but he is a player that's going to be super. He's going to benefit tremendously of being here, playing consistent minutes on a team that now we know has this ambition to once again get to the top. Maybe Supporters Shield is not their focus, but it's definitely going to be MLS Cup, a team that has that ambition. And he's playing his way right back into the national team picture for the Copa America. And those are the things that really make a difference because you say, okay, sure, he goes to Europe. Maybe he doesn't get consistent playing time. Now he's taking himself out of that picture. And I think he was very aware if he stayed, he could be a top defender in the league. He's playing consistently, not playing on a team that's not going to be competitive. He's playing on probably one of the better teams next season. So all that plays in effect. And you have to remember, like, the international call up and that stage of Copa America where you're going to have the best of the best here in the States is such a elusive opportunity for these people. It's just like bright lights. It's their showcase. And from that, if he has a good first half of the season with Cincinnati, which I'm sure we all expect that to be the case, he plays his way back into the Copa America, U.S. national team. He plays a solid Copa America. They do whatever they do in that tournament. Now he's getting a lot more looks than he was 6 months prior when he was trying to figure out where to go. He clearly didn't want to be in Atlanta. I think he made a very smart decision, and I see all benefit for him. If he does play to his potential, which we know what it is, it's going to be big for him. So I love it, man. I think he's a fun player to watch. He's very confident. And like I said, he knew if he was going to stay in MLS, he was going to go to a team that was going to be, competitive, and he wasn't going to go to a team that's like trying to piece things together. So in that sense, it's a home run for Cincinnati. And I think for him, because now he leaves that door open, and who knows, maybe next year it could be that leap that he wants to make to Europe.
I mean, look, I think it sets him up for an opportunity to find club success next season, as well as, like you said, international success, and even lock down a spot at the USMNT in a position where there's not a lot of consistency from international window to international window, right? Like we get some of the similar names, but at the end of the day, I think our potential best starting center back pairing isn't set in stone. So I really think that this is a strong move for Robinson. And look, if all goes well for him, he can still potentially get that European move next year as a free agent and kind of control his own future there. So I love it. I love it for Miles, and kind of happy to see him, doing his best after coming back from an injury as well. I want to shift gears to the Colorado Rapids because we kind of mentioned them to start the episode a little bit. We've talked a lot, and the podcast has talked a lot about Georgi Mihailovic, Jack Steff, and Omir Fernandez, those moves, that we've seen over the last few weeks. On top of it, the Rapids continue to make moves underneath Chris Armas this offseason, acquiring Jasper Loffelsend from Real Salt Lake. They also, it's not official yet, but Tom Bogert's reporting the deal to bring back left back Sam Vines from Royal Antwerp. I mean, have we... part of me is a little hesitant that everyone's kind of overhyping the Rapids and we're just kind of setting it up for failure for them to kind of, go through a little bit of what we saw with Chris Armas up in Toronto a few seasons ago. Other part of me really wants to believe in it because we're seeing a lot of MLS experienced guys coming back to MLS who have had success. I don't know. Are you on the hype train for the Rapids? Are you on the kind of be cautious train? Where are you at with it?
I'm definitely on the be cautious train because it's Colorado, and it's also it's a new day for them. Like you're talking about Armas, like you have a coach that obviously has a ton of experience in the league, which is great. You have, like you mentioned, these players coming back that have this experience in the league, which is also great. But you have to put it together, right? And it's not the same Zach Steffen that was the starting goalkeeper for the U.S. years ago. I think Georgie's a hell of a player. I'm excited for him to come back in the role and the responsibility that he's getting. I think it could be really good for him. But there's still some pieces that they need to figure out. I think they're still lacking like a very important midfield piece. But coming from what they've been in the past few years, same way I mentioned with the Galaxy, it's a win because not only are you gaining that attention, you're kind of showing that ambition and saying, okay, like we're not going to be this team that kind of just people look over all the time anymore. Like this is the transition from what people talk about MLS 1.0 to 2.0, whatever. Like they were stuck in the past. They were stuck in the old days of MLS, and they kind of weren't able to punch the way with the with the new teams and all of these new signings. So I like what they're doing. Like I said, probably the best offseason so far in terms of movement, in terms of showing that, like I said, ambition. But we need to see it. And it could work out great. It could not be great. I think the pieces that they're putting together make sense, right? But now Chris Armas has a slate to work with, and what he does with that, what type of soccer he plays with it, what approach he brings to the game. Is he going to bring the Red Bulls approach? Is he going to take some ideas from the Red Bulls approach? Like, there's a lot of question marks to just be overhyping it. But so far, like, sure, man, why not knocking it out the park? And I think you have to be cautiously optimistic, but you also have to realize, like, the West it just fluctuates. Like, there's teams like St. Louis is a great example. I think St. Louis, we didn't know what to expect from them last year. I feel like we know less what to expect from them this season. Like, I don't know. They could be great. They could be terrible. Like, so
I agree.
It's interesting in the West. So I think there's definitely a lot of movement. Whereas like the East, you kind of know like the top 5 or 6 teams are kind of defined in whatever way that's going to be. So there's opportunity for the Rapids to make some noise. And I think it's good because they're going to start bringing back a fan base that does love that team and that's been pretty loyal throughout some bad times. So I like it, but I'm not going to, say, oh, they're going to be a top 4 team in the West. Yeah, I still need to see how the roster gets rounded out a little more, but thumbs up, man.
I mean, look, this may be not a great indictment of the Colorado Rapids organization, but I give more chances of them finishing like top 4 or 5 in the West more to the strength of the Western Conference than I do to the moves that they make. The West is, at this point, present day MLS is a weaker conference to the Eastern Conference, in my opinion. Especially with what we have question marks around LAFC that we've chatted about. I agree with you on the St. Louis take. They're, reportedly selling Nicolas Gioacchini to Como in the Italian Serie B for a few million, but what are they going to be? There's a lot of question marks around the West, which is a good thing for the Rapids probably, but also maybe a bad thing as well for their own organization and how the last few seasons have gone. So look, it's a continued, I like what they're doing. Now you got to put it together on the field, and let's see if Chris Armas has also learned a little something from his coaching experiences in England over the last few years. 2 other, I guess, kind of major moves departing Major League Soccer over the last week or so. Jefferson Savarino sold to Botafogo for a deal that Tom Bogert was reporting around $2.7 million for, and plus also some sell-on percentage. This opens up a second DP spot for RSL. Do you have any? I mean, like, look, Jefferson Savarino as an RSL legend at this point. Like, I think as far as games plays, goals scores, goals contributed to, he's at like the top of the RSL record books. I think last season was ugly for Savarino internally with what was going on between him and the organization. But do you have any opinion on where you would like to see RSL potentially try to kind of fill these two DP spots with, and kind of pairing them with Arango up top?
Yeah, that's a good question, man, because I think that RSL has pieces there that make a lot of sense and that work, but I still think there's a level of like they're probably like a 1 or 2 players away from like really completing that puzzle.
Yeah.
And I think Chicho might need a running mate. I think he might need a attacker, a striker that kind of helps him out, because the one thing about Chicho is he's a hell of a striker, but in his time in Colombia, he also played a 10. So he's that type of player that could benefit from having another striker up there, that he's not going to really lose a lot of his value if he's not just a lone striker, because he's able to kind of track back a little bit and play that 10 role a little freely. So a striker would benefit them tremendously. But I think that roster is like rounded out pretty well. The pieces they have are not bad. They obviously losing Sava is a big deal. They had some other key departures and whatnot, but Mascheroni is one of those guys that like he's gonna get those players riled up. And I think the players that they have, like I said, the younger ones, Vera had a great season last year. They have these players. Nelson Palacios still kind of growing into his own as a player in MLS, but making strides as well. Like they have these players that have potential. And then you have a player like Chicho who's already defined, that from my conversations with him is more like he's now more of a mentor to these other players too. I think they have the pieces that they could be successful, but once again, in typical RSL fashion, like it could be, they could be a great team and they could also be like a terrible team, because you never truly know with those guys. But I think that striker would probably make sense for them, because otherwise, like, you might add somebody else in the midfield, but then it gets tricky on how Mascheroni wants to play. Like we saw last season when Chicho was out, they struggled obviously because he was injured and things like that. But where is the soccer coming from? What formation, what tactics are you using? And if you don't have Chicho, or if you have another striker, or if you have 2 players up top. So I think that part is tricky, but that's the fun part for the coaches, is figuring out the personnel and figuring out like how we're going to approach this. I think that if they do go with another striker, then it gives them a lot more balance, and it kind of changes a little bit of they're not going to be one dimensional in certain ways. Because I think when they got in trouble last year, you kind of just saw, all right, we're going to just try to feed the ball to the middle and see what happens. And that's necessarily not going to work for a lot of teams anymore. Like I always think back to the Galaxy when they had Zlatan. All they did was cross the ball, and it's like just hope that he's going to jump in. And most of the time he did, but it's like that one-dimensional soccer in this day and age does not work. So I think creating a little bit of a balance with some more attacking players helps them a lot, because I think defensively they weren't bad, and I think they still are able to kind of play that transition the way they want to, if they have a little bit more balance in the midfield and the attacking third. So I kind of like what they have, but once again, it could be like, man, they're still missing that piece and they never get it, and then they're like 11th place all season and just struggling.
I mean, look, I agree with you that I think RSL need to be dangerous in more than just one way. And I think, look, we saw it in the playoffs last year. It was kind of just like, especially with the Arango like injury concerns, it was like, give it to Diego Luna, he'll do something and he'll make magic. Like he's also just like, at this point, respectively to him in his career, he's a kid. Like he doesn't have enough, professional minutes under his belt where I think you can almost do that and let him control the game. Now, if he can, great. And RSL is probably going to sell him for a crap ton of money in the future, and he still probably will. But this is a very young team that is being led by a veteran presence of an Arango, of a Pablo Ruiz, who's going to be coming back from injury from last season, who I love and I think is a fantastic player. But this is a young team that I think if you can add some maybe in prime DP level, whether it's another striker, whether it's someone on the wing, whether it's even a DP level, I don't know, attacking mid, a center back, something like that I feel like can help bolster this RSL team. To the point we said about the Rapids a few minutes ago, the West is weak. And I think if RSL can kind of take advantage of these 2 DP spots they have open right now, they could see themselves at the top of the Western Conference with the strong roster, a strong base that they have. Let's jump to the Eastern Conference really quickly. Luquinhas, he was sold to Fortaleza in Brazil on a deal that, again, Tom Bogert's all my reporting, because Tom Bogert's the best at doing it right now. Yeah. So the deal is reported to be $3 million in combination with all the add-ons, that if the add-ons hit, that they'll kind of make up that $3 million that they spent to bring Leukemias in a few years ago. This opens up a DP spot for the Red Bulls next to Emil Forsberg and Dante Van Zier. I mean, look, the Red Bulls, it's always a very interesting specific thing because, right, it has to be a player that fits that Red Bull system and fits the style that they want to play. But I don't know. Do you think that there's a chance that the Red Bulls kind of continue this really massive overhaul that they've been doing quietly on their own this offseason and bring in another high level, maybe DP striker to play next to a Van Zier, or play kind of closely with the Forsberg on that left side?
I think they need to. I think this is a perfect opportunity for Red Bull to kind of make that jump, because you don't know what you're going to get out of Van Zier, and that's the issue. I think if you were a little bit confident and say, okay, we know Van Zier is going to give us X amount of goals or X amount of assists, whatever, then you're like, okay, but I think you can't wait. You have to kind of aid him and say, okay, we're going to get him help to give you these amount of goals, because obviously the Forsberg move is a move that excites a lot of people. It's a move that people are optimistic about. But like you said, these players have to fit the Red Bull mold. And that's the important thing there. When you look at who they're bringing in and what they're doing, it's a team that consistently in MLS has been competitive, whether or not people like to watch them, whether or not people that's a whole different conversation. But they have this stature. They have this, I think, this necessity of kind of saying, okay, we're good now. We're going to try to bang the table and make that next step, because once again, the East is stacked up top, is very top heavy, and now you're factoring in Miami and things like that. But I think the Red Bull have a perfect opportunity in terms of what they have now and what they could kind of what they could do and how they could build on that. It's a lot of teams, I feel like this season, are starting on like a fresh page, and this is another one that's like, okay, we're kind of flipping this page. Last year was interesting, I think, is a perfect word. It was good, it was bad, it was problematic for them. So there's a little bit of like a new start feel for them, and if they do bring in another high level attacker that's going to kind of aid that, then you're kind of cooking with some gas, because the way they like to play and go, if they have that, you have Van Zier, you have Forsberg, and you have another player, like that's a good look for them. And then obviously in the reverse, it falls back on the defense and what Token could do and how they could be. But there's definitely levels for them to grow, and I think that it starts up top, and then you have to look backwards and say, okay, maybe we need some more depth pieces, some more pieces in the middle that are going to give us a little bit more of that hold when we need it. But when you're bought into a system and you know what you want to do, it's beneficial. It's a lot more beneficial than teams kind of say, okay, maybe we'll play this way, maybe we'll play that way. From all the coaches I've talked to, the Red Bull way is annoying for every coach, because you know what's coming and it's still hard to play against. And I think when you have that advantage if the players, like you said, fit those roles. So yeah, they're probably like a good top striker away from making some serious noise in the East.
The thing that I love about opportunities like this around Major League Soccer, right? You have a new manager in Sandro Schwarz who's coming into the league completely new. So he's still probably having to learn everything and learn the roster rules and everything like that. But on top of that, this is such an opportunity for him to put the staple onto his roster, right? Like the Forsberg deal, I don't know if that was completely him, if that was completely kind of going on before his hiring or before his time, whatever it may be. I have a little bit of a feeling it's probably the latter there, but I mean, this is an opportunity for him to be like, okay, there's a DP from the last regime. We have Emil Forsberg, a Red Bull guy we're bringing in. Okay, love it. But now who can I go out or try to put my impact onto this roster with? And it's exciting. Maybe it's something that comes in the summer. I don't know. We'll have to wait and see on the Red Bulls there. But Andy, I'll finish things up with this episode by asking you, right, it's the MLS offseason. Free agencies are moving everywhere. And I think MLS free agencies turning more and more into an exciting thing as, more and more players are eligible and everything like that. We've seen Corey Baird go to Cincy, Kai Wagner kind of re-signing with the Philadelphia Union in a little bit of a surprising move. Nathan going to the Seattle Sounders. Fafa Picault going up to the Vancouver Whitecaps. Is there a free agency move in recent time or overall this offseason? I know we talked a little bit about Miles Robinson that you're kind of, looking at and you're like, this could be a good one for the next season.
Man, I'm gonna say it. I think it's Julian Gressel. I think it's just hard, man, because you try to have these MLS conversations and not talk about that team, but there's just so much going on over there. And when you're aiming big and you're bringing these big name players. I just saw the center back mentioned today, which is a area they really needed. Like, you look at that team and they're so stacked in the positions that they need to be, aside from the Messi and the Busquets and these stars. But like adding somebody like Julian Gressel, who we know what he does. We've seen him in different teams in the league. We saw how beneficial he was last season. I just think it's such a practical and smart move for that team that it almost like makes people angry. Like, how and why? Like, it's just crazy, because you could use Gressel in so many ways in that team, right? And they're playing multiple competitions, and from what it seems, their focus is CONCACAF Champions Cup. So there's going to be opportunity for him to play defensively. There's going to be opportunities for him to play in the midfield. And when you have the talent that they have, when you bring somebody like Luis Suarez, who at this age is probably not gonna. I mean, let me not get too ahead of myself. At this age, he might not be able to one-on-one with a lot of defenders in MLS. You never know. He might be able to, but like he's gonna benefit from Gressel's service, and we know Gressel crossing the ball is one of the best we've seen. And then you have, I just think that the way Tata Martino like looks at this team right now, he's like, wow, this is I have the pick of litter. I could play however I want to. I could,
Literally.
It's just so much potential on that team right now. And it's not just the names. I think it's the fact that they have built the roster out in a way that's going to benefit them in terms of, like I said, that longevity of playing multiple competitions.
Yeah.
I'm not like Miami's going to, win everything and be the best team in MLS. I'm not that, because I'm not naive to think that Suarez gets injured or Busquets is tired or, things like that. And once again, Messi is still playing for Argentina. He's still playing in this Copa America year. So there's a lot of factors to it. But I think Gressel, like I mentioned, is just such a smart, practical move for a player who has shown his worth in this league already. He landed in probably, I think, to me, the best spot, because he's going to be able to do exactly what he does best. And it's going to be amazing to watch. So I would say Gressel.
Where do you, and this is a you personal question, right? Where do you like personally would love to see Gressel play more of, right? Because it's like, obviously we've seen him play a lot of right wing back, and DeAndre Yedlin's in that spot. Personally, I'd like to see him as kind of one of the eights in the midfield. If I think Gressel should be starting, which is wild with the names we're talking about on this roster, but I think he is one of the best passers of the ball in Major League Soccer, and he flourished under Tata Martino at Atlanta. So I personally think he should be starting as one of the eights in the midfield. What's your take, or like what's your opinion on where you think Gressel should be playing a majority of his time? Because like you said, he's going to be playing a lot of positions for this club.
I think the best setup for Miami is playing 3 back and then playing with a line of 5 and having him be able to be a wing back, because you have to, like, with a player like Gressel, you also have to realize, like, he's gonna the way he gets up the field, he's gonna leave those spaces. But when you have somebody like Sergio Busquets, you're like, I'm fine, leave the spaces. Go ahead. Like, that's the difference this is the difference that it makes when you have a player of that caliber. And it's not just him. Like, the midfield for Miami, they have options there. They have subs. They have a lot to work with. So when Gressel's able to flourish in that role, I think in that line of playing like that 8, playing that free wing back role, I think it's going to be the best for him, because it's going to be hard for him to say, okay, we're going to put him back. And granted, if you're playing a regular back 4, you're not going to have Yedlin play every game when you have opportunity to make some changes and give him some rest. But to have Gressel and Yedlin as like the pair you have to pick from, but then also be like, hey, Gressel, you could kind of move up and play a little bit up here. Like I said, to Tata, this is a dream, man. Like, he has a roster and he could really maneuver this in many different ways. And it's going to take away from like what we saw last year, where everybody's like, where's Messi? Where's Messi? Like, obviously teams are still going to do that. But if you do that with this Miami team, the way it's built, you're going to get burnt by everybody else. And I think Tata and Inter Miami are A-okay with that happening. So it's a lot of weapons. I agree with you. I think in that role is where he's going to flourish. But man, it's exciting for him, man, because he just has everything at his exposure now with the teammates that he now has, which is crazy. And then salute to Robert Taylor, man. Like, He went crazy last year. And now he's in a situation where he's playing with all these legends. Like it's a beautiful story. Kremaski, like it's fun, man. Like it's one of those things that's like, Messi and Suarez, like it's the big names, but I think fans of the league that are like us that are like really tapped in, we're excited to see what these other players are going to be able to do under the system more so than we are like the defined Messis. And Busquets is going to give you these passes and Jordi Alba is going to give you, like, we know what they're going to give us. I'm excited to see what everybody else is going to do on that team.
No, for sure. Look, I mean, Robert Taylor is probably hoping that Messi gets all the attention. He's going to be the Finnish Neymar next year, and he's going to be, he's going to be cleaning stuff up. I love it. Look, I think I agree with you. I'm not of the opinion that Inter Miami's gonna win, CONCACAF Champions Cup and MLS Cup and all this stuff. I do think they take home another trophy, because I think if you just have a majority of these guys healthy for one competition, they're gonna take home a trophy. I just, it's which one is it at the end of the day? Is it more than one? We'll have to wait and see. I think that's going to be the fun of a part of the fun of the MLS season next year. Andy, where can the people find you? Where can the people follow you at and everything like that? I'll give you your time to shine right here.
Appreciate it, man. Pleasure being on. We've chopped it up. Big fan of what you guys do. So keep up the great work. I'm on Twitter. Is my name Andy_Deossa, where I get all my takes off and retweet all of my old takes that were right. But we're gearing up for a fun season, man. I'm still a little undecided about what we'll be doing in terms of work, but some good stuff is coming. I'll tell you that much for sure. So we'll hit the ground running. And speaking of Miami, their first game is here in LA. So I'm sure there will be a lot of fun stuff going on.
All right, well, I need to make sure you get to that game one, because I got to see all the takes. But my favorite Andy tweet is the tweet of him from like 5 months ago, and then like you retweeting it. It's my favorite thing. So make sure you guys go follow Andy over on Twitter, on social media. Andy, thank you so much, man. I appreciate it.
Appreciate you, man. Thanks.